Well, welcome to one of the first series of videos I'm going to do, and I'm going to call them workshop waffles. And basically, I'll be talking about some workshop related items, but none of which really have enough content to warrant their own video. So I'm going to put a few things together, and hopefully, you know, some people will find it interesting. First thing I'm going to talk about today is indicators. Up to now, I had two indicators in my workshop. This rather nice Mitutoyo, which I got secondhand from eBay, and I like it because it's got really large dial on it. It's easy to read. And this DTI, shade DTI, which I got from Banggood, which I also like, is, you know, does the job. Now, most of the time, I don't work to tolerances and accuracies which requires this level of accurate measurement. Now and again, I do need an indicator because, well, mainly for clocking up work in a four-jaw chuck. That's what I mainly use my indicators for. However, some time back, I was watching a video that Dave Richards had put up on his channel, and if you've not seen Dave Richards, I thoroughly recommend you go and have a look at his channel. It's absolutely brilliant. He's got this old steam-powered machine shop, and he was using an indicator of a type I'd never seen before on one of his belt-powered lathes in his old steam-powered machine shop. So I did a bit of research, and from what I could gather, it was a Starrett model number 64, this indicator, and I was just fascinated by this thing, as I'd not seen any of these before. So I did a bit more research, and I found an absolutely brilliant video that my mate Rob down in Australia had done on his channel Zanudo. And he restored one of these Starrett indicators and got it working, and he'd done some brilliant comparisons between it and a modern dial indicator like this and DTI. So I was intrigued by this. I've been trying to get hold of one of these things for ages, and they seem to go for quite a lot of money, and I finally got one in really good condition, and I'll show you that now. And here it is. We'll quickly zoom in on this. So there we go. So this is a Starrett 64 indicator, and this is the sort of thing that was used years ago, long before we had dial indicators and dial test indicators. This is what was used by machinists for accurate measuring, again, clocking in chucks. Ordinary chucks that weren't scroll chucks, that had independent jaws long before we had our auto chucks that we've got nowadays. And you had to clock up basically every bit of work that you put in one. So, and this is what was used. And I just love these, the elegant simplicity of it. It's just an amazing bit of kit. Now, after getting this one, this was followed quite rapidly, despite the fact it took me a long time to get that one. This one. Now, we'll have another close in on that for you. There you go. So now another Starrett, and this is a number 564 dial indicator, and it's exactly the same. It works on the same principle as this first one. Oh, let's come out again so you can see it. There we go. But this has the added refinement of this lovely articulated end piece here, so you can turn it round and alter the angle that the probe is actually working at. Very, very clever stuff. And again, it's a lovely bit of kit. So, as I said, Rob, my friend Rob, brilliant video on his channel about his restoration of one of these, and also comparing it against a dial indicator. So I'm not going to repeat what he did. I'll put a link in the description to his video because it's excellent. But I will stick it on the lathe, and you can have a look at it in operation. Okay, I've got both gauges, the Mitutoyo dial indicator and the Starrett indicator, are clocked onto the nut on my ER32 collet chuck. And the reason I've done this is because if you actually clock it onto this, the actual chuck itself, there's almost no movement. Even on the dial indicator, there is very little movement. But obviously, the collet nut is nowhere near as accurately machined on the outside edge, so that you do get some movement. And it's very interesting to watch. So they're more or less both zero, and if we turn it around. Now bear in mind that the Mitutoyo dial, one full revolution of that dial, that's 10 thou, okay? So we've moved about 10 thou there, and the indicator here is showing us, I think, just under 10. So it's not exactly the same, but it's not far off. And if we come back down, there we go. So as you can see, the movement is of the two gauges is pretty good, really. And of course, they're not actually on the same part of the nut, so they both read roughly the same. Which, I don't know how old that Starrett indicator is, but it's pretty damn old. So I think that's pretty amazing, really. So there you go. Quite interesting. Now, obviously, now I've got my little milling machine, I'm going to be using the DTI certainly on that to make sure I've got edges on work straight and so forth. But for clocking up on the 4-jaw, I actually prefer using the Starrett 64. The fact that it's got a coarser scale on it, so I think it's plus or minus 15 thou. It doesn't flicker around so much as the dial indicator does, or the DTI. And let's face it, you're just truing up a piece of work to make sure that it is rotating squarely. So I actually like using this. I find this brilliant little bit of kit. And as I said, the design of it, the beauty, the simplicity of it is just beautiful. So there you go. That's the little bit about indicators. This, you will have seen in my videos, many of them recently, is the turntable that I built to put my stuff on and show when I'm, particularly with the model steam engine and everything, and I'm really pleased with it. It works really well. When I made it, I used a mains cord with an inline switch, which I thought would be ideal for just turning the thing on and off. Which it is. However, I've come up with a major problem with this, and that is, obviously when I'm filming, I'm behind the camera, and sometimes when I've got something on the turntable, I want to turn the turntable on and off. You know, I want to stop it in a certain place, and I have to reach around the camera, and quite often I knock the camera and I'm struggling to find the switch. So I was thinking, okay, well, I need a remote way of turning this on and off the turntable. So I thought, oh, okay, I'm sure I can come up with some method of doing that. But I thought, well, before I do, I'll have a look online and see whether there's any commercial product out there that will do what I want. And of course, there's loads of them. So I basically ended up with that. Now, what that is a three-way remote programmable control outlet, as it says on the box. And this came from Amazon. I think it's about £15. I think that ain't that expensive. So we'll open up. You can have a look what's in the box. So you get a little remote with 3 pairs of buttons on it, and you get 3 of these switchable mains adapters. Oh. And I thought, right, well, you know, this I think hopefully is ideal for what I want. The remote simply has 3 pairs of buttons on and off for each one, and they're coded, so you know they don't interfere with each other. So I thought, right, I'll order some of these. It only came a couple of days ago, and we'll try that. Now each one of these has a little button on the side of it, which is the manual override, so you can turn it off using that, but it's also the program button. Now they reckon that they're rated at 13 amps, which I doubt very much, to be honest with you. But anyway, that doesn't matter because this thing draws next to no current, even when there's a load on it. It's very low power. So I'll plug it in, and you can have a look at it in operation. Okay, so we've got something on the turntable, and this is a sneak preview of something that's coming up fairly shortly. Right, so there's a remote. It's all plugged in and turned on, so we just hit the on button for socket 1, and away she goes. And the off. Now, because this is an asynchronous motor, the direction it rotates and when it starts is arbitrary, random, but that doesn't really bother me. The important thing is to be able to turn on the turntable and turn it off, and it works superbly. And range-wise on this, it's brilliant. I've got as far as I can away from it in my house, which is about, I don't know, 18 to 20 feet, and it still works absolutely superbly. So yeah, does the job. So if you guys out there need this kind of ability to turn your mains devices off and on remotely, then I can certainly, you know, recommend this. It does the job superbly. Again, I don't trust its power rating. I certainly wouldn't run my dishwasher, not that I've got a dishwasher, but my washing machine or anything like that off of it, because I just don't believe it could handle the power. But something like this, you know, no problem at all. I'll put a link in the description to the actual item that I purchased off of Amazon. But yeah, very useful. So hopefully now there'll be no more jogging the camera when I go to turn the bloody turntable on and off. Well, I'm back over on the old Warco lathe, and if you look carefully, you'll notice that there's been an addition. Let's move the camera around. Yeah. We now have a little extra display on the lathe. So what's that all about then? Well, I have a confession to make. I've had my lathe now 2 years, and a few weeks ago I actually managed to break it. Basically, I managed to break this. I'll come back out again. This is what I managed to break. Yeah, that is the motor for the lathe. Now, I do have some consolation in the fact that I'm not the only person who's done this. Far better people than me, and I think you know who I'm talking about, Aid, also did exactly the same thing on exactly the same lathe. Now, I thought at first maybe I'd overloaded it, but I think that that wasn't the case. I think that it overheated. The reason I think that is that the only cooling for the motors on these lathes is the fan, I don't know whether you can see that, that's inside there. There's a little fan in the end there which blows cold air over the motor when it's running, which is fine when using the lathe at high speeds, you know, 800 RPM, 1000, you know, 2500, whatever, you get loads of cooling. However, if you happen to be doing, as I was, some turning of large diameter pieces of metal, in this case I was making a flywheel up for my electromagnet engine, and that was a 4-inch aluminium lump of metal I was turning, which meant of course that I was only running the lathe at about 250 RPM. Now I was aware of this possible overheating problem because of what happened with Aid and his lathe, so I didn't like run it for hours at that speed. I thought I'd given it enough breaks in between running. I would run it for a sort of like half an hour or so, and then I'd walk away and let it cool down and then come back and do it again. But obviously I didn't, and I managed to burn the motor out. So I'd like to make a quick shout out to the guys at Warco here. I gave them a phone call, they had one in stock, and I had it within 3 days. I've had nothing but great support from people at Warco since I've had my lathe. They've been extremely helpful, so yeah, shout out to them. Also, thank you to Aid, because he did a video about changing out the motor on his lathe, and that was extremely helpful. It's not difficult. If you've got one of these lathes and you ever have to do this, it is actually fairly easy to change the motor. It's not difficult. But Aid's video, obviously he had to do it before me, so you know that was extremely helpful. So thanks for that, Aid. Appreciate it. I'll put a link in the description to Aid's video. So what's this display all about then? Well, when I was fitting the new one, the new motor that is, I was trying to work out whether there was any way I could sort of increase the cooling on the motor, and it's very difficult because there's not an awful lot of room in the area where the motor is, and you can't just stick a fan on, you know, near the lathe, because you're just going to suck in swarf and chips and all sorts of crap. So you really need a ducted air supply, and it just was, I thought, would be too difficult to do. And then I was talking to a mate about it, and he said, how about putting a digital temperature gauge on the motor so you can at least monitor the temp that the motor's running at, and you know, watch it, and if it gets too hot, turn the bloody thing off and let it cool down, which I thought was a brilliant idea personally, you know. So I started looking into digital temperature gauges, and in the end I opted for one of these. And what this is, in actual fact, is this is a kitchen temperature gauge, and it's designed to use with an oven, and the probe is like a knitting needle, stainless steel, and you plunge it into your joint of meat and you leave it in there and it monitors the internal temperature of the joint. Now, the reason I went for that in this particular instance is a couple of reasons. One, you've got a stainless steel probe, which is ideal, and it's very easy to strap that probe to the outside of the motor because it's about the same length as the motor, so you just strap it onto the casing. It also comes with this braided armoured cable, which is useful for the environment that it's going to be used in. And the display itself has got magnets on it, so that's great. So I just made a bracket up so that I could, you know, clip it to the bracket, and it is easily removable. And it's got two displays on it. This one is the current ambient temperature, which is what the motor's sitting at the moment, which obviously is what the room's sitting at, which is 21 degrees. You can have it in centigrade or Fahrenheit, depending on your preference. This one here is an alarm temp, so you can set this to sound an alarm when the temperature gets to a certain point, which again, if I'm going to use the machine for a long period of time, I will almost certainly do that. So I'm hoping that this edition, and this was not very expensive. I can't remember exactly what I paid for it, but these were not a lot of money. We're talking like £20 tops for this, you know. So I'm hoping that this will stop me from doing this again. So that's what that's there for. And again, as I said, very easy to fit. You get quite a long length of cable with the probe and the display, and also it's not hardwired into the display. It goes into the display. I'll just pull this off. As you can see, that's a little 3.5mm jack socket, so you can disconnect the probe from the display. Yeah, it's in fact it's ideal for this purpose. So yeah, there you go. So that's what that is. Right, that's about it for this first waffle. Hope you found something useful in it, and thanks very much for watching. Cheers.